Well, in one sense, I'd like to say, my ego or whatever be like, oh yeah, like, it was me and I did all this kind of stuff. And, I mean, I have worked hard. I think I'm where I'm at in this catch wrestling scene because honestly, I'm the biggest nerd. I'm more obsessed than anybody else. And I've done more work. I mean, that's just made more sacrifices. Doesn't mean I'm better or anything. It's just, I've flipping worked my ass off, dude, for 20 years. That's the truth. But there's another side of it, to your answer, to your question directly, when I started really getting very serious about it, I started grappling in 94. I was very lucky to see UFC 2 live here in Colorado. And because I was going to University of Colorado Boulder at the time, I was training judo at the YMCA in Boulder. And, I saw this flyer. I was like, oh man, this is so cool. So me and my buddy went and saw it. And it was an epiphany, man. Changed my whole life. Like, I was like, Jesus, this is what I want to do. Like, this is amazing. I mean, probably like most people who their first exposure to MMA or jiu-jitsu or grappling, they're just like, oh my God. So I dedicated myself to do it. But back then, man, I was not connected. I didn't know anybody. I lived in Colorado. Like, all the jiu-jitsu was in Southern California. Maybe there was Carly Gracie up north in San Francisco. And it was very difficult. So I had a hard time getting any bookings. There was no tournaments. It was all real wild, wild west. And to be honest with you, I got a little frustrated. I started dating this stripper, and she was really into pro wrestling. Like, it was like kind of that SmackDown was new, and like The Rock and all those guys were huge. And so I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm going to try pro wrestling. And I had so much, because pro wrestling had been established. Dude, I was getting booked. I was getting paid. I was traveling the world. It was awesome. It was like being a rock star, but I can't play an instrument. So I did pro wrestling for a while, but I got burned out on it because it was fake, man. Like, so many of the guys back then, and I don't know how it is now because I haven't done it in years, but a lot of the pro wrestlers, man, yeah, they get big and jacked on steroids or whatever, but they start believing their own bullshit. And, I would turn them inside out, and I'm just kind of this lanky, skinny dude. And I'm turning, you know how this goes, like the traditional bodybuilder guy who doesn't know anything versus a grappler who's a noodle, but really knows his stuff. Like, so I just kind of got burned out, and I started gravitating towards this more Japanese style of pro wrestling. And I ended up hooking up with this gym in Hayward called Pro Wrestling Iron. And these were guys that were wrestling. They were affiliated with Pro Wrestling Noah, which for Kazushi Sakuraba's wrestling for them now, to give you an idea. And when I went into practice, we were shooting. We were like really wrestling. It wasn't any bullshit. And it was because it was that Japanese influence, which is really the catch wrestling influence. And this was probably around 2001. And that got my brain really like, oh, I need to figure this out. And it was the same time that Sakuraba started burning through all these Gracies, right? Yeah. So I was like way into it. I'm like, I already knew jiu-jitsu. I'd been practicing for a while. Wasn't getting the kind of traction I wanted in terms of a career, doing what I wanted to do with it. And then found a way back into grappling through pro wrestling in the Japanese style. But, as I started searching it out, there was just no quality control. Like jiu-jitsu has black belts and tournaments and competitions, and that's quality control. Who knows what's up. Yeah. But with the pro wrestling and the grappling, it was so much bullshit, and it was difficult. So that was kind of a lot of the reason why I decided to start scientific wrestling was quality control. I knew that I couldn't be the only one that was a nerd for this style of grappling. I knew there was a demand for it, but nobody was really filling, supplying that need for solid, reputable shit. And so I just went out, sought out the real deal. Like I started out with getting a hold of Carl Gotch. And then from there, he recommended me talk to Fujiwara. And then, Josh Barnett started noticing what I was doing, and he knew Billy, and I was having a hard time getting a hold of Billy. And so he hooked me and Billy up, and then Billy and I just became really fast friends. I mean, even like family. I mean, he calls me family in his book, and I can't find a better word for it, because we spent a lot of time together and did a lot of crazy shit. And I named my my last son after Billy as well. So that's kind of the evolution of scientific wrestling. I just really felt there needed to be quality control. I felt like, yeah, I have a lot of respect for jiu-jitsu. It's just not what I'm into per se. And I felt like, you know, catch wrestling needs this kind of update given the modern way that grappling has evolved. There needed to be a little bit more quality control and a way for people to get access to it.
That's great. Well, you know, Jake, it's funny. I've asked many people over the years how their passion got going. You're the first one to say that it came from dating a stripper out of frustration. That's might be my favorite answer so far. So that's great, man.